If there's one thing you know about fantasy football, upside wins. You want those players that can put up huge games. Well, we got some of those players in mind for week 9. Before we give you our boom picks, let me remind you that you can do the pick'ems on Underdog Fantasy right now. And if you are a new customer, you get a freebie. Lamar Jackson just needs 1 yard this Sunday, and that's a free pick for you. And you can combine it with any other pick and triple your entry. Don't forget when you sign up for the first time, use code ENDGAME, and that also guarantees you 100% deposit match up to $500. You can also click the link down below to take you straight there. All right, so who do you think might have some huge upside this week?
Yeah, I liked Garrett Wilson last week against the Giants. He had a nice game, 7 catches, 100 yards. Not quite a boom, but a good game. But I do think this week, in week 9, he does boom. Because now the Jets go back home and they get the Chargers, one of the worst defenses in the league against the pass, against wide receivers. They're giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers. They're allowing the most yards per game to wide receivers. And they're even allowing the 3rd most touchdowns to wide receivers. And again, they're at home, which means Zach Wilson should at least be good enough this week. At least good enough to support Garrett Wilson for a boom. This is a guy who pretty much dominates the targets here. He's pretty much the only guy Zach Wilson throws to. This week, he should be open all over the field. I think he has touchdown upside this week. Again, being at home is a major plus. So again, I liked Garrett Wilson last week, but I actually love Garrett Wilson this week. I think this week he is going to boom.
Well, believe it or not, I'm also going with the Jet. It's rare that I do that at all, but back to back in the same week? Well, let me explain. So you know who else Zach Wilson likes throwing the ball to? It's actually not a receiver. It's Breece Hall. This is becoming a trend that you want to notice. Now, Breece Hall, if you look at his rushing numbers the last couple of games, is bad. It's actually really bad. His rushing average has been really down the last 2 games, coming off of that 122-yard rushing performance the week before that. Now, he's been pretty much boom or bust, right? He'll rip off these big long runs, get you a huge touchdown, or kind of do not much. But what he has started doing, again, the last 2 games, is catching the ball. So notice that his total opportunities are exactly where you want them for a starting running back. I'm not quite yet to the point where I say I'm going to start Breece Hall, no questions asked, every week, but I think he's definitely a strong starter going forward. Last 3 weeks, 25, 17, and 21 opportunities. That means targets and rushing attempts. But what I've noticed the last 2 games, 5 targets and then 9 targets. And so last week, even though running the ball didn't happen for him, he made his day as a receiver. And it just so happens that the Chargers, besides giving a lot of points to receivers, like you mentioned, they give up a lot. In fact, they are top 5, or I guess you can consider bottom 5 in terms of giving up receiving yardage to running backs. So you combine the way Breece is being used with the way this defense plays, Breece Hall, whether it's on the ground or in the air, maybe a little bit of both, I think he's going to be also another guy who carries this Jets offense this week. So I'm feeling confident enough to say I definitely want to start him because I feel another big fantasy day. All right, tell me who else you're feeling this week.
I'm feeling Rashee Rice. And look, I know he didn't come through last week, but we got to chalk that up to Patrick Mahomes being far from Patrick Mahomes. We heard about it late in the week, had this flu, was getting IVs. Obviously, it affected his play. But I like the way Rashee Rice is progressing even with that down game. He's now run a route on over 60% of the dropbacks in 2 straight games. He's gotten at least 5 targets in all but 3 games this year. He's gone over 50 yards in the last 3 games. And we know this is a guy who's a red zone threat. He's a threat to score a touchdown. And he gets a great matchup this week against the Dolphins. No, they're not fantastic on paper against wide receivers. They're kind of middle of the road. But what I do like is they're giving up touchdowns. Dolphins are currently allowing the 5th most touchdowns per game to wide receivers. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. You got to think Patrick Mahomes is going to be significantly better. He's not going to be sick. We're going to see a much better Mahomes. This should be a shootout. Dolphins games are always fast-paced. They're always high-scoring. I think we see a lot of scoring in this game, and I think Rashee Rice gets at least 1 touchdown this week, not to mention to go with the receptions and the yards. So don't give up on him last week. That was an outlier with a weird Mahomes type of game. Big bounce back week coming in a great matchup for Rashee Rice.
All right, I'm going to call a bounce back game for a guy who started out super hot and has really slowed down along with the whole offense in Houston. Nico Collins. Houston started out passing the ball a ton. I mean, far more than anybody expected. And now that's kind of slowed down. Their whole offense, like I said, has just not been scoring as many points. I mean, they just lost to Carolina. They let them have their first win. So is something going on? Is Stroud regressing? Is this whole offense just not clicking? Well, I think I might have found something, maybe not the answer per se, but there are some pronounced home road splits with this team and with this young offense especially. So going back to Houston, going to go against Tampa Bay. This is a good, not amazing matchup. I'm not looking just at the defense here. I'm looking at the fact that in the home games that Nico Collins has played, he's got 394 yards and 3 touchdowns. In the road games he's played, he has 183 yards and no touchdowns. And he's played more games on the road, 4 compared to 3. That's a pretty big difference. Those huge games he had early on, remember, they were all at home. I don't know if this is something that will continue on, but you can't ignore the fact that he's tripling his yards per game at home. Going back, I think they're going to be mad after losing to Carolina. They're going to get right. Nico Collins is going to be a big part of this passing attack. And even if he doesn't go off, I can easily take the higher on him in underdog pick'ems. 58.5 yards. Yes, I will take that. He's one of the easiest picks for me to take. And like I said, if you're new to underdog and you don't know how it works, it's super easy. You sign up, use our promo code ENDGAME to guarantee that 100% deposit match. You take the new customer special I mentioned earlier. That's Lamar Jackson just getting a yard. You put it with Nico or any other pick you like, and just like that, you can triple your money. So check it out. All right, but let's get back to the booms. Who else do you like?
Well, are we seeing a new lead running back in Carolina? I think we are, because Chuba Hubbard seemed to be the guy. And by the guy, I mean a bell cow running back. He outsnapped Miles Sanders 45-19. He had 16 routes to Miles Sanders, only had 9. And he had 17 opportunities to Miles Sanders' 2. That's right. Miles Sanders had 2 carries. That's it. No targets, no yards, nothing. Miles Sanders was barely even a backup running back in this game. It was all Chuba Hubbard. And now he gets a fantastic matchup this week against the Colts. Colts are currently allowing the 4th most points to running backs and the 2nd most touchdowns. We just saw Taysom Hill, who I guess is technically a running back for the Saints, score 2 touchdowns. Alvin Kamara scored 2 touchdowns. This Colts defense is not very good against running backs, and Chuba Hubbard looks like he's clearly the lead back. But in this matchup, that is enough. If he's going to get all the touches, if he's going to catch passes, if he's going to have chances to score, that's about the best you can ask for at the running back position these days. So Chuba Hubbard, if you grabbed him a couple weeks back when Miles Sanders was banged up and you've held on to him, this is the week you definitely want to start him. He looks like the lead back in a great matchup. I think Chuba Hubbard comes through with a big game.
Well, stay in that same matchup and look on the other side. Look, Zach Moss isn't taking over the starting job there. In fact, he's taking a back seat, but barely, to Jonathan Taylor, which is odd, but it is true. We're still seeing Moss involved, and you know what? He's still fancy relevant, and he's still a strong start. And in fact, I like him enough. I think he's going to have a big game this week. Let's look at what he just did against the Saints, which were a top 10 run defense, wound up with 66 yards and a touchdown. All right, so you take that and the fact that he's still involved even in the second half of games. Again, not sure exactly why it's not all JT at this point, but maybe Moss has been good enough, and he's pressing this coaching staff, that they just want to get him touches. Whatever the case is, it's happening. He is still involved. He's got standalone value. So now he gets to go against the Panthers, who you already know are now the worst run defense in the league, because even though the Broncos, yeah, they've given up more fancy points, if you take away even just half of that game against Miami, Carolina has been worse significantly over the last month. So going against the 2nd worst run defense in the league here, and they give up the most touchdowns to running backs. Even with JT healthy and back, Moss has gotten 12 and 19 touches the last 2 games. He's getting in the end zone. He'll catch passes. Not only is he startable in this matchup, I think he's a must start. All right, give me one more guy you feel has to be in your lineup this week.
Yeah, I like Dak Prescott a lot last week at home against the Rams coming out of the bye, but I like him even more this week against the Eagles. Now, it would be nice if they were at home again. That'd make me like him even more. but I still really like him this week. The Eagles are allowing the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks, as well as the third most touchdowns, and they just gave up a 30-point game to Sam Howell. For whatever reason, this Eagles defense is still elite against the run, but they have really struggled against the pass this year. We've seen it week in, week out. These games turn into shootouts. The other team just ends up throwing the ball a ton. And the Eagles secondary is not a shutdown secondary like they were last year. Not a secondary that scares me at all. This Cowboys offense did look like they went into the bye, figured some things out, came out a totally different offense. Absolutely on fire last week. I think that continues this week. If you picked up Dak Prescott to stream last week, just keep rolling with him again. He should have another huge game here in week 9.
All right, now I'm going to turn my attention to a tight end that 2 weeks ago I told you to stash him. A week ago I told you to add him. This week I'm telling you have to start Trey McBride. He's been coming on. Where's the ceiling? Maybe we don't even know yet. Last week, didn't expect him to go off like this. Third highest target share out of any player. I'm not talking tight ends. I'm talking any player. He was targeted 14 times, wound up with 10 catches, 95 yards, and a touchdown. That's a huge game even for a receiver. Now, I will say there is going to be a little bit of change here this week because the guy who's getting the ball last week is not the quarterback anymore. But we know what happens a lot of times with rookie quarterbacks. Where do they look? They look to the easy target. That's the big guy down the middle. It's Trey McBride. I really don't think his target share goes down that much, if at all. Even with a rookie quarterback, I almost don't care. McBride looks like a guy that if you picked him up, you're going to be really happy that you got a replacement at tight end that you can roll out the rest of the year. So this week, I don't really care who's at quarterback. If I got McBride, I'm going to roll him out there and see what happens. All right, those are the guys that we love this week, our favorite boom picks. You want to know how we feel about all the guys at every position? You know we got that start sit along with waiver wire, buy low, everything you need to win in week 9 in this playlist.